Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now, let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The church was full of whispered doubt the day Amara and Obina tied the knot. It wasn't because of her dress, though it was simple, or the decor, though it was modest. It was because Mama Obina sat at the far corner with a stiff jaw and narrowed eyes, refusing to smile throughout the ceremony. Still, none of that mattered to Amara as she looked into Obina's eyes at the altar. His hand trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, but his voice was sure. "For better, for worse," he said. "In barrenness or in fruitfulness, I choose you." Amara smiled through her tears, grateful for this man who had fought to marry her despite his family's resistance. She had been called too quiet, too average, too childlike by his relatives, but Obina had insisted she was the woman for him. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment he rented on the outskirts of Enugu, and though they had no washing machine, they had laughter. They had no generator, but they had prayer. Their nights were filled with shared dreams and whispered promises beneath a creaky ceiling fan. In the first year of marriage, they became inseparable partners. Amara cooked, cleaned, and typed reports for Obina's startup while waiting tables on weekends. Obina, in turn, treated her like a queen. He left love notes on her pillow, walked her to church hand in hand, and insisted she rest while he ran errands on Sundays. They talked about baby names during midnight walks and watched YouTube parenting channels together. Whenever anyone made insensitive remarks about children, Obina would gently squeeze Amara's hand and say, "God's time is the best." Amara, raised in a home where love was often drowned out by survival, marveled at how Obina softened her. His kisses made her laugh. His voice made her feel safe. He told her not to worry, that even if children didn't come quickly, he would never let go of her. "You are my family," he said one evening, as they both watched the generator hum from the neighbor's compound. And for a while, Amara believed him. She believed in love, strong, sacrificial, enduring love. They started small, but they dreamed big. Amara used her NYSC savings to buy baking supplies and sold pastries at the church gate. Obina, a logistics graduate, started his courier business with a borrowed bike and 3 clients. He would rush home each evening, shoes dusty, but eyes glowing with ambition. Amara welcomed him with open arms and warm rice. Their home was humble, but their hope was extravagant. They took turns praying by the window every morning. They laughed when the water stopped running and carried buckets from 2 compounds away. In those days, the dream of having children wasn't a burden. It was a prayer they offered together, folded into every sacrifice. Obina would sometimes lean close and whisper, "Just one child that looks like you, and I'll be the happiest man alive." And Amara, holding onto those words like a vow, never imagined they would one day be used against her. The sacrifices began subtly, like pebbles gathering at the edge of a stream. Amara had been offered a teaching position at a reputable private school in the city just a month after their wedding, a dream she had clung to throughout university. But when Obina's logistics business hit a snag, an investor pulling out at the last minute, he needed money to replace a lost motorcycle. Without hesitation, Amara turned down the job and handed him her savings. "We are one," she told him, her smile unwavering even as her heart mourned a dream deferred. It was never framed as a sacrifice, only love. She told herself they would both rise together, that what she was giving up now would return later in joy and success. And in the early months, Obina appreciated her with every fiber of his being. He told everyone that Amara was not just his wife, but the engine behind his hustle. Amara swelled with pride, believing she had chosen well. Her days became long and tireless. She woke at dawn to prepare breakfast, managed his bookings, answered business calls when he was on the road, and still found time to bake pastries for the neighborhood kiosk. There were no holidays or spa days. Amara found her joy in Obina's growth. When he landed his first big contract with a small supermarket chain, he lifted her off the ground and spun her around in the living room. They celebrated with boiled yam and pepper sauce. Even when she fell sick from exhaustion and fainted in the kitchen, she begged the nurse to let her out early so she could pack his files for the next meeting. "You're doing too much," her friend Ngozi once said. "He should hire someone." But Amara shook her head. "I'm his helper," she replied. "If I don't stand by him now, when will I?" She wore her loyalty like a badge and never allowed herself to imagine that it would one day be ridiculed. Obinna was grateful at first. He boasted about her to friends and in church testimonies. He told new couples during counseling that Amara was the secret behind his early success. But with every new achievement, something inside him shifted. The more praise he received from the outside world, the less he credited Amara. She watched as he began standing taller in rooms, speaking louder, laughing with other women more freely. He started calling her sacrifices expected, and her efforts part of her role. Still, Amara continued to serve with all her heart, believing marriage was a marathon of service and submission. She prayed fervently, asking God to bless them with children. The only thing she wanted more than Obinna's success was a child to call her own. She began to mark her cycle, drink herbal teas, and attend fertility seminars secretly. But through it all, she never blamed Obinna. She believed he was a good man, just overwhelmed, and that once they had a child, all their problems would fade. 3 years passed. Still no child. The silence in their home became more pronounced than words. Every time a neighbor gave birth, Amara congratulated them with a gift and went home to cry alone. The "when are we coming for naming?" jokes became knives. Mama Obinna visited more frequently and began making pointed comments. "What kind of woman doesn't give her husband a child?" she would say while peeling plantains in the kitchen. "My mother had 5 children in 10 years. What is this delay?" Amara tried to serve her diligently, hoping kindness would soften her, but the older woman remained ice. Obinna began nodding along silently, no longer defending Amara the way he used to. The quiet between them turned into a wall, then a wedge, then a wound. And when friends came over and asked how the babies were coming, Obinna would sigh dramatically and say, "Let's keep praying," casting a quick, accusing glance in Amara's direction. Amara felt the shift like a physical ache. She began to internalize the failure, wondering if her womb was cursed. She went from gynecologist to gynecologist, spending her own money on consultations. Each time, the results were the same: she was fine. One doctor finally asked, "Has your husband done a semen analysis?" Amara blinked. "He said there's no need. That it's me." The doctor sighed and handed her a pamphlet on male fertility. When she brought it up at home, Obinna exploded. "Are you calling me the problem? You're the woman. Your womb is the carrier. You fix it." The slap of his words stung harder than any physical blow. That night, Amara curled into herself on the cold side of the bed, facing the wall, and cried silently. She could no longer remember the last time he had touched her gently, or told her she was beautiful. Her marriage was crumbling quietly, and no one saw it but her. Mama Obinna seized the moment. She began inviting prophetesses into the house. One swore Amara had marine spirits preventing conception. Another said she had secretly aborted a child before marriage, and the spirit was haunting her. Amara was forced to fast for 21 days, drink strange concoctions, and undergo midnight deliverance prayers, where Obinna stood watching, arms crossed. Her dignity slowly eroded. Chisum began spending nights at the house under the guise of helping Amara manage her stress. She would rub Obinna's shoulders, laugh at his jokes, and walk past Amara in lace wrappers with the confidence of someone waiting for her throne. And still, Amara held on. She believed that if she just endured a little longer, if she stayed faithful, prayed harder, gave more, God would see her tears. Her womb, she hoped, would not remain empty forever. It began with smiles, too many smiles. Chisum had always been in their orbit, a distant friend of Obinna's from university days. But now she became a daily presence. She came under the guise of helping Amara cope with stress. "You need to rest, Amara," she would say in a honeyed voice, taking over chores without being asked. At first, Amara welcomed the gesture. She was exhausted, emotionally battered by years of unanswered prayers and cold silences. But soon, Chisum's helpfulness took on a shade of intrusion. She began serving Obinna his meals directly, slipping extra meat into his plate with a coy laugh. She started calling him Obi darling in Amara's presence, chuckling when she saw Amara stiffen. "Oh, I've always called him that," she would say, feigning innocence. Slowly, she became the third person at the dinner table. The voice Obinna listened to more attentively than his wife's. The laughter that echoed in the house when Amara's voice had long gone silent. Amara observed the shifting dynamics in her own home with a growing ache. She couldn't confront Chisum. Obinna always defended her, brushing off Amara's concerns as jealousy. "She's just trying to help you relax," he'd say dismissively, never once asking how it felt to see another woman cradle his head in her lap on the living room couch. Chisum began wearing clothes that clung to her curves like second skin, silk blouses, sheer wrappers, dresses too short for someone claiming to be just a friend. And yet, Obinna never noticed, or pretended not to. What pained Amara most wasn't just the betrayal forming in plain sight. It was the way her husband allowed it. It was the way he walked past her to receive his fruit platter from another woman's hands. The way he now laughed louder when Chisum was around and became tense when Amara entered the room. Her once warm home had turned into a gallery of mockery, and she was now just an observer. Church members still admired them, not knowing what went on behind their plastered smiles. At Sunday services, Chisum would sometimes sit with them, whispering into Obinna's ear while Amara held her Bible like a shield. "Mama Obinna adored Chisum. She's lively," she once told Amara. "Not like you with all your quietness and bad luck." The word stung, but Amara said nothing. She buried herself in cooking, baking, and crying quietly in the bathroom. At night, she listened to Chisum's laughter from the guest room while her own bed remained untouched by love. She knew things were slipping away, but she didn't know how to stop it. All she had left was prayer. And even that, some nights, felt like shouting into a void. It was then she began asking herself the question she had once feared. What if love wasn't enough? Amara's decision to take the fertility test was one born of desperation, not defiance. She did it quietly, using the money she had hidden from her pastry sales. The gynecologist was kind, listened to her tears, and ran all the tests. When the results came back, they were clear. Her reproductive system was healthy. Her hormones were balanced. Her womb was ready. "Your partner should come in," the doctor said gently. But when Amara suggested it to Obinna that evening, she barely got the words out before he exploded. "So now it's me," he shouted. "You think I'm the one with the problem?" He stormed out and didn't return until morning. When he did, he acted as if nothing had happened, but the silence he carried spoke volumes. From that day, Amara knew she would carry this shame alone, not because it was hers, but because he refused to share it. Mama Obinna worsened matters. "You're hiding your wicked past," she told Amara in front of Chisum one morning. "Don't think I don't know. Some of you girls destroy your wombs in school and come here pretending to be virtuous." Amara blinked back tears, holding her tongue. There was no point arguing. Even the house help had started treating her like a leper, gossiping in hushed tones while sweeping around her. Obinna said nothing through it all. He no longer kissed her forehead or complimented her cooking. He became a ghost of the man she married, physically present but emotionally buried in resentment. Amara often sat at the dining table long after everyone had left, staring at the plates, wondering how a love so full of laughter had become so soaked in bitterness. She wanted to scream, to run, to shake him and ask, "Where did you go?" But even her voice no longer seemed welcome in her own home. One night, she went to bed and wept until her pillow was drenched. She begged God to either give her a child or give her peace, because she could no longer live in this limbo. She wrote in her journal that evening, "I do not know what hurts more, that I cannot conceive, or that I am being punished for something I did not cause." She stopped sharing updates about her business, stopped baking, stopped hoping. She simply went through the motions, waking, cooking, praying, and folding into herself like a dying flower. The house no longer felt like a home. It was a courtroom, and she was the only one on trial. She still smiled when guests visited, still nodded when Obinna barked orders. But deep down, something inside her had begun to break, and she feared that when it finally did, no one would notice. It started with distance. Obinna began sleeping in the guest room, claiming he needed space to think. Amara didn't argue. She simply folded his bed sheets every morning and left his meals at the door. But then came the little cruelties. The way he spoke over her at family meetings. The way he introduced her to guests with dry indifference. The way he cut her off mid-sentence, as though her words were unworthy of his attention. When they sat together at dinner, he stared at his phone. When she touched his arm, he shifted away. Her touch, once his comfort, now seemed like a burden. The love that once radiated from his eyes had turned to something cold, calculating. And Amara, still desperate for connection, tried harder, cooking his favorite meals, praying louder, buying new clothes. But nothing melted the ice. It was as if someone had turned off a switch in his soul, and she was now a stranger in her own marriage. Chisum's presence filled the gaps. She began organizing family functions, managing Obinna's calendar, and even representing him at business meetings. One day, Amara overheard her on the phone with a client, introducing herself as Obinna's partner. That word stung. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of a marriage already gasping for air. When Amara confronted Obinna, he laughed. "She helps me," he said with a shrug. "Something you used to do." The words hit harder than any slap. Amara went back to her room that night and stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were sunken, her cheeks hollow, her spirit bruised. She no longer recognized the woman staring back. She had become a shadow, still standing, still present, but fading. And she wondered, not for the first time, if Obinna would even notice if she disappeared. But it wasn't just Obinna's affection that turned cold, it was his hands. The man who once held her face like a sacred thing now pushed her aside in anger. One morning, during a heated argument, he grabbed her wrist so tightly she winced. "You don't know your place anymore," he snarled. It wasn't just words now, it was weight. The weight of unspoken violence, of disrespect turned physical. Amara locked herself in the bathroom afterward and shook uncontrollably. She realized then that she was no longer safe, not emotionally, not physically, not spiritually. The man who had promised to protect her was now her greatest threat. And yet, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she still hoped. She still believed in the man he once was. She still believed love could rise again. What she didn't yet realize was that sometimes love doesn't return. Sometimes it becomes something unrecognizable and dangerous. Amara was mopping the living room one humid Tuesday afternoon when Mama Obinna returned home with a woman clad in flowing purple robes and thick bangles that clinked at every movement. "This is Prophetess Olama," Mama announced, as if she were royalty. "She has come to reveal the spiritual chains holding this family hostage." Amara looked up, confused and cautious. Obinna, sitting on the couch, didn't object. He barely glanced at Amara as the prophetess placed a small bowl of oil in the center of the room. She began to chant, her voice rising and falling in melodic waves. Then she stopped abruptly, turned to Amara, and pointed a trembling finger. "You," she said with theatrical flair, "you are not just barren. You are the bride of a marine spirit." Gasps filled the air. Mama Obinna fell on her knees in faux agony. Chisum clutched her pearls with feigned shock. And Obinna, he said nothing. He just stared, a grim frown settling deeper across his face. The days that followed were a blend of chaos and cruelty. Prophetess Olama declared a 7-day fasting and deliverance program for Amara, complete with night vigils, bitter herbal concoctions, and isolation from the bedroom. She was forced to sleep on a mat in the corridor and eat only once a day. Mama Obinna called neighbors to join in the nightly prayers, shouting into the heavens and clapping until her palms turned red. Amara felt stripped of her dignity, her privacy invaded, and her name dragged through spiritual mud. Whenever she tried to object, she was silenced. "If you have nothing to hide," Mama Obinna sneered, "then endure it." Chisum stood by smugly, her role in the household solidifying as she led prayers, read scripture, and interpreted visions. Amara was now just the cursed woman everyone pitied or blamed, never believed. She cried herself to sleep each night on the cold tile floor, praying to a God who seemed heartbreakingly silent. Obinna's silence hurt more than the prophetess' words. She could have endured the spiritual abuse, if only he had stood by her. But instead he avoided her gaze, refused her meals, and spoke to her through Chisum or his mother. His actions, no his inaction, told her everything she needed to know. The man who once held her hand during prayers now folded his arms as strangers accused her of demonic possession. One night, after another exhausting round of deliverance prayers, Amara collapsed in the kitchen. She was rushed to the hospital with dehydration and fatigue. Obina didn't come. Chisum did, smiling like the victorious queen in a war only she knew had already been won. When Amara returned home, her mat had been moved closer to the kitchen. That night, as she lay in the shadows, she began to realize she was no longer seen as a wife. She was now a symbol of shame, and her erasure had begun. The silence between Amara and Obina eventually shattered, but not into conversation, into confrontation. One evening, she finally mustered the courage to confront him in their bedroom, hoping, desperately, that something of the man she married still lived behind his cold stare. "Obina," she whispered, standing beside the bed where he now lay alone, "do you still love me?" He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable, then sat upright. "Love?" he asked bitterly. "Do you think love is enough when a man has no child? When his mother calls him weak every day? When his friends whisper that he may be impotent because of his wife's witchcraft?" His words sliced through her. "They mock me, Amara. They say I am not a man. And you," he pointed at her like a prosecutor, "you give me nothing. Nothing but prayer and tears." Amara stood frozen, tears welling. "I gave you everything I had," she replied, voice trembling. "My dreams, my money, my body. You're the one who changed." But he wasn't listening. Obina had already built his case in his mind, and now the bedroom became a courtroom. "I should have listened to my mother," he muttered. "You were always too quiet, too soft. I thought you were a prayer warrior. Turns out you're just a delay." Amara felt her knees weaken. She sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to breathe through the pain. "And Chisum," she finally asked, "is she part of your judgment too?" Obina didn't respond, but the flicker in his eyes was enough. She had her answer. "I've never stopped being your wife, Obina," she said, more to herself than to him. "Even when you stopped being my husband." But Obina was already walking out, slamming the door behind him. She curled up on the bed alone, heart beating like a gavel. The verdict had been passed. She was guilty of being barren, and her sentence was slow emotional death. In the days that followed, the emotional abuse intensified. Obina no longer addressed her directly. Chisum, with her smug confidence, now served him dinner in their bedroom. Amara often found her clothes and makeup in the master bathroom. Her own things had been pushed to the corner. Mama Obina spread the news among their relatives that Amara had refused deliverance and cursed her own womb. Amara became the subject of pity in church, the one women avoided eye contact with. And in her own house, her only refuge was silence. She stopped talking, stopped arguing, stopped defending herself. But even in her stillness, Obina pushed. One night, he shouted across the house that he regretted ever marrying her. "I should have chosen Chisum from the beginning," he spat. "You were a mistake." Amara retreated into the guest room that night and wrote in her journal, "When your own home becomes the battlefield, you either flee or prepare to die in silence." She hadn't chosen either, yet. It was raining that night, an ominous kind of rain that beat against the windows like fists. Amara was in the kitchen, cleaning up the untouched dinner she had placed on the table hours earlier, when she heard the front door slam. Obina had returned. She heard the thud of his shoes being kicked off, the clatter of his belt hitting the hallway wall, the muttered curses under his breath. He was drunk. The smell hit her before he did, pungent, bitter, and dangerous. She tried to avoid him, retreating toward the hallway, but he blocked her path. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt soaked. So he growled, "You're still here." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. His breath was laced with alcohol and rage. "You're just a ghost now, aren't you? Just moving around like a cursed shadow." Amara clutched the edge of the wall for balance. "Please, Obina," she said softly, "let's talk in the morning." But Obinna wasn't looking for conversation. He was looking for a scapegoat. The months of anger, shame, and frustration, all misplaced, all festering, boiled over. He grabbed her arm roughly and dragged her into the bedroom, shoving her onto the bed. Amara screamed, pleaded, kicked, but he overpowered her. "You owe me," he slurred. "You owe me a child. A legacy." And in one violent, soul-shattering moment, he forced himself on her. It wasn't just her body he violated, it was everything. Her trust, her memories, the sacred bond they once shared. When it was over, he collapsed beside her and passed out snoring, while Amara lay still, broken, staring at the ceiling. Her sobs were silent. She didn't want to wake him. She didn't want to ever hear his voice again. That night, something inside her died. Not just love, but faith. Faith in the man she married. Faith in the prayers she had cried out night after night. Faith in the idea that loyalty protected you from pain. She left the bed before dawn, gathered her wrapper, and showered in scalding water, as if she could wash away the horror. But no amount of scrubbing removed the memory. When he woke up hours later, he didn't apologize. He didn't even remember. He simply asked her to iron his shirt and left for work. Amara stood there, her hands trembling on the ironing board, and knew with terrifying clarity, she was not safe here. Not emotionally, not physically, not spiritually. A week later, she would be thrown out like a piece of broken furniture. But the truth was, she had already been discarded that night. Her soul had been evicted long before her body followed. And yet, despite the devastation, despite the ruin, deep within her, something still remained. A tiny, hidden spark. A womb that hadn't given up. A life waiting to grow in the darkness of her despair. The day Obinna told Amara to leave the house, the sky was clear. No thunder. No warning. Just a quiet, cruel morning. He walked in, fully dressed, reeking of aftershave and self-importance, and dropped a brown envelope on the table with her name scrawled across it. "That's from a lawyer," he said, without emotion. Amara blinked at it, frozen, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Lawyer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're divorcing me?" He didn't look at her. He poured himself a drink at 10 a.m. and took a sip like it was water. "This marriage is over, Amara," he said simply. "I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I can't keep living like this, empty." She stood up, shaking. "After everything I gave you?" Her voice cracked. "After all I endured? After what you did to me?" That last part made his gaze flick to hers, briefly, but no remorse followed. "Just leave. Don't make this ugly," he said. "You have till this evening." Mama Obinna was waiting outside, dressed in her best lace, like it was a celebration. "You've finally grown sense, my son," she said, clapping. "Let her go before she finishes you." Chisum stood at the gate with folded arms and a knowing smile. "Some women are meant for suffering," she whispered to no one in particular. Amara went inside, numb, and packed a few clothes into a faded bag. Her wedding photo sat on the shelf, mocking her. She picked it up, stared at the smiling faces, then smashed it against the wall. Glass shattered, but it didn't make her feel better. She took nothing but her clothes, her Bible, and the journal where she had written down all her silent prayers. As she stepped outside, Mama Obinna spat on the ground. "You will never carry a child," she said with venom. "You are cursed." But Amara didn't respond. She walked away barefoot, her eyes dry. Even tears had abandoned her. She wandered the streets until the sun began to set. With no destination, no money, and nowhere to go, she sat outside a closed shop and placed her bag beside her. She looked up at the sky, wondering if God was watching, if he even cared. That night, she slept under a half-closed umbrella left behind by a street vendor. The mosquitoes feasted on her. The cold air mocked her exposed feet. But she didn't cry. She couldn't. Something had shut off inside her. The next morning, a woman sweeping the area startled her awake. "Sister, are you okay?" the woman asked. Amara nodded slowly. "I just need a place to sit for a while," she whispered. The woman led her to a nearby church compound and introduced her to Mama Ifioma, a retired teacher and widow who ran a small soup kitchen for displaced women. One look at Amara's swollen eyes and pale face, and Mama Ifioma opened her arms and said, "Stay here, my child. You don't have to talk yet." It was the first time Amara had felt safe in months. Mama Ifioma's compound was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was heaven to Amara. The walls were clean, the air smelled of pepper soup and balm, and the silence wasn't the painful kind, it was healing. For days, Amara didn't say a word. She ate the hot yam porridge Mama Ifioma served, helped sweep the front yard, and sat under the mango tree staring at the birds. She still flinched when someone raised their voice, and nightmares woke her up at night, but slowly, her body began to loosen from the tight coil of trauma. Mama Ifioma didn't ask questions. She simply placed her hand on Amara's back during evening prayers and said, "God sees." And those 2 words made Amara sob one night, for the first time in weeks. She cried into Mama Ifioma's wrapper like a child, releasing all the pain she had buried to survive. That night, something shifted. It was the beginning of breath, of being alive again. As the days turned into weeks, Amara began helping at the small soup kitchen. She chopped onions, fried puff-puff, and quietly served meals to the hungry. One afternoon, she fainted while cleaning the stove. When she awoke on the clinic bed nearby, she was surrounded by Mama Ifioma and 2 nurses. "You're dehydrated," one of them said. "But we've taken blood samples just to be sure." Amara nodded weakly, her body still fragile. The next morning, the nurse returned with a soft smile. "Congratulations," she said gently. "You're pregnant." Amara's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You're about 7 weeks in. Twins, from what the scan shows." The world tilted. She sat up slowly, her hands shaking. No, that's not possible," she whispered. Her mind went to the night she had tried so hard to erase. That night. The violation. The pain. And yet from that horror came life. Not just 1, but 2. She wept again, not from sorrow this time, but from disbelief and silent awe. Later that night, Amara sat outside, touching her stomach with trembling hands. "My God," she murmured. "After everything, you remembered me." Mama Ifioma came to sit beside her and placed a hand on her knee. "Your womb was never closed, my child," she said. "Sometimes it takes fire to reveal gold." Amara nodded, still unable to process the miracle. She didn't know how she would raise twins, where she would live, or how to survive the judgment that would come. But for the first time in years, she felt like her life still held meaning. That something inside her, something beyond pain, was growing. She named them in her heart that night, Chisum and Chikamso. One a testimony, the other a journey. And though she was still poor, still broken, still uncertain of the future, she was no longer barren. And that was enough hope to begin again. Pregnancy changed Amara in ways she didn't expect. Her body ached constantly, her emotions swung like a pendulum, and her cravings were unpredictable. But it was the strength that surprised her most. Where she had once felt like glass, fragile, breakable, she now felt rooted, like a tree bending but not falling. Her mornings were filled with soft hymns and baby kicks. Her nights with whispered prayers and quiet journaling. She kept the pregnancy hidden from everyone except Mama Ifioma and the kind nurse at the clinic. "They don't need to know," she told herself. "Let them think I vanished." She had no intention of returning to Obina or explaining anything to those who had buried her before she died. This pregnancy was hers alone. A miracle card from pain. A redemption story not yet told. She began sewing baby clothes from scraps and watching YouTube tutorials on childbirth. She may have been alone, but she was not helpless. The months passed quickly, and with every movement from within her, she felt purpose. She remembered the names people had called her, barren, curse, dead womb, and smiled sadly. How wrong they had been. How blind. She would often place her palm on her belly and whisper, "You are not a mistake. You are the proof that God still sees me." The twins became her anchor. When the world had discarded her, they were the ones who kept her going. And yet there were moments, especially late at night, when she remembered how they were conceived, and her chest tightened. The trauma of that night didn't vanish just because life grew from it. She struggled to separate the violence from the miracle. But with therapy offered through a local women's support group, she began to heal. You don't have to love the memory, her counselor told her one day. But you can still love what came from it. Amara held onto that truth like a lifeline. By the time she was 8 months along, Amara had moved into a small rented room attached to the church, thanks to Mama Ifeoma's connections. She gave birth to her twins on a quiet Thursday morning, surrounded by midwives who held her hands and whispered strength into her ears. When the babies came, screaming and full of life, Amara looked at them and wept. They were perfect. One had her eyes. The other had Obina's nose. It didn't matter. They were hers. Entirely hers. She kissed their foreheads and repeated their names over and over. Chisum and Chikamso. Her boys. Her beginning. The hospital staff clapped, moved by the tears running down her face. I thought I was empty, Amara whispered to her sons at night. But you filled me. Outside, the world remained harsh and judgmental. But in that small room, under flickering light and the scent of newborn warmth, Amara found a peace no man could ever take from her again. The first few weeks after giving birth were a quiet storm of exhaustion, fear, and overwhelming love. Amara barely slept. One twin was always awake, crying, feeding, or simply needing to be held. And often both cried in a symphony that pushed her to the edge of her strength. But every time she looked into their faces, her heart reset. They were reminders that life could come from ruins. She had nothing, not a husband, not a steady income, not even family who acknowledged her existence. But she had them. She no longer mourned the Obina she once loved. That man had died long before the divorce. She mourned her own lost innocence instead, how she had believed that loyalty and sacrifice would shield her from betrayal. But holding her sons, she knew she hadn't lost. She had simply been redirected. Her womb had not been a graveyard, as others once suggested. It had been a garden waiting for its season. Amara named them officially in a modest naming ceremony organized by Mama Ifeoma and the church women. There was no crowd, no camera, no dancing. Just prayers, 2 white wrappers tied like blessings, and the chorus of "You Are Great" humming gently in the background. She carried both twins on her back and whispered their names aloud in church. Chisum, God answered me, and Chikamso, I am walking in God's will. The congregation wept. Some women, who had heard whispers about her past, cried as if it were their own redemption. No one asked about the father. Everyone who mattered already knew enough to understand her silence. It was in that moment that Amara realized she had something stronger than a surname or a ring. She had a story that could not be erased. She didn't want pity. She wanted purpose. And now she had it. Every time she fed her babies, she reminded herself, this cradle is not a coffin. I am not buried. I am born again. Still, survival was not a poem. It was work. Real, grueling work. Diapers, food, rent, medical checkups. They all cost money she didn't have. Amara started baking again, selling meat pies and puff-puff in nylon bags to secondary school students. She tied the babies on her back and walked under the sun, smiling at customers, masking her fatigue. Some people pitied her. Others judged her. But no one ignored her. Her food was good, better than most, and slowly, her name spread. A woman named Nkechi, who ran a local food blog, ordered some of her pastries one day and asked for a photo. Amara hesitated, then agreed. You're a woman of grace, Nkechi told her. People need to know stories like yours. Amara didn't know it then, but that photo, her in a faded wrapper, smiling with flour on her face and twins asleep beside her, would become the spark that lit her journey to something greater than she ever imagined. The orders began as a trickle, then became a stream. Nkechi's post went viral, shared across Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp statuses. Meet Amara, the woman who bakes with babies on her back, the caption read. People were stunned by her resilience and the quiet fire in her smile. Amara was flooded with requests for pastries from nearby towns and churches. A women's support NGO contacted her and offered a small grant to expand her business. They helped her buy a larger oven, a second-hand freezer, and utensils for proper packaging. For the first time in years, Amara had tools. Not just tools of survival, but tools of self-reinvention. She renamed her small venture Graced Hands Bakery. With a painted signboard and fresh confidence, she began taking bulk orders for weddings, baby dedications, and church conventions. Her twins became the bakery's tiny mascots, often strapped to her back or napping in a makeshift cradle beside flour sacks. Her hustle became her identity, and her smile returned, not because life was easy, but because it was hers again. But it wasn't just about business. Amara began to heal emotionally, too. She joined a local fellowship of single mothers and found women whose stories mirrored hers in pain and hope. They shared testimonies, prayer points, and strategies for pushing through hardship. One day, during a testimony night, Amara stood and told her story, start to finish. She didn't cry until she mentioned the night Obinna forced himself on her, the night she thought her womanhood had died. The room went silent. Then one woman, then another, came to hug her. That night, Amara was not just a baker, a mother, or a survivor. She was a voice, a warrior. She left the meeting with shoulders straighter and spirit stronger. She stopped hiding the twins when she posted online. She began to speak boldly about second chances and faith. She started mentoring 2 younger women who had been abandoned during their own pregnancies. Amara was no longer just rebuilding her life. She was helping others rebuild theirs. Her reputation caught the attention of a diaspora-based women's empowerment initiative. They were looking for grassroots entrepreneurs with powerful stories to feature in their annual conference, this time to be held in Ghana. When the email came, inviting her to speak and showcase her work, Amara froze. She stared at the screen for nearly an hour before reading it again. "Is this real?" she asked Mama Ifeoma, who screamed with joy and hugged her tightly. With the help of the NGO that had supported her, Amara processed her travel documents. It wasn't easy. There were delays, doubts, days she questioned her worth, but eventually her passport was stamped, and her name was listed as a guest speaker and exhibitor. Before she left, she took a quiet walk to the front of her former marital house. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. She just whispered to the gate, "You threw me away. But I didn't break. I baked." Then she turned and walked into her next chapter. When Amara stepped into the bright-lit hall of the Ghanaian Conference Center, her eyes welled with tears. Banners lined the entrance, each bearing photos and names of women across Africa who had overcome adversity. But it was the one near the main entrance that made her stop. Her own face, smiling, strong. The caption read, "Amara Nwokeji, from abandoned to empowered." She stood still for a moment, barely breathing. The babies she had once fed with borrowed milk were now toddling beside her, holding onto her wrapper as they looked around curiously. She bent down, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Look, my loves. That's your mummy." Cameras clicked nearby. Some guests approached her with hugs and questions. But Amara was no longer intimidated. She had earned this moment. With calloused hands and a soul that had been torn and mended, she walked into the auditorium like a queen returning from exile. On stage, Amara shared her story. Not for pity, not for applause, but for liberation. She told the audience how she had once believed her life ended the day her husband threw her out, how she had felt less than a woman because she couldn't conceive, how she had prayed, served, sacrificed, and still been discarded. Then she told them how, from the ashes of that rejection, came 2 sons. How she started again with nothing but a spatula and faith. How she learned that the womb is not the only place a woman can birth power. The hall was silent. Some women sobbed openly. Others nodded fiercely. And when she ended with the words, "They said I was barren, but God said I was just beginning," the ovation shook the room. She didn't cry on stage. She stood tall, voice steady, like the storm had taught her not just how to survive, but how to lead. After her speech, she met women from all walks of life, CEOs, farmers, widows, teachers, each of them sharing their own version of struggle and success. One of the keynote speakers, a wealthy businesswoman, offered to partner with Graced Hands Bakery and fund a franchise back in Nigeria. Another invited her to London for an upcoming empowerment series. Amara's phone buzzed nonstop. Her Instagram followers doubled overnight. Her email flooded with inquiries. Yet through it all, she remained grounded. Her mind didn't rush to luxury or revenge. It returned to her twins, to Mama Ifioma, to the kneeling nights when she had only one prayer. Lord, please don't let me be forgotten. And here she was, remembered. Not just by God, but by nations. Her past no longer defined her. It had shaped her. But now, her future had a new voice, and it spoke in the language of honor, not heartbreak. While Amara stood before international crowds, telling her story and building an empire, Obinna sat alone in the same living room, where he had once screamed, "You're a waste of my life." But now, it was Chisum's voice that echoed through the house, and it was never quiet. She no longer bothered with pretense. The sweetness she had once used to steal Obinna's attention had turned bitter. She spent most nights out, attending parties and returning reeking of alcohol and perfume that wasn't hers. When Obinna questioned her, she laughed in his face. "I married you for the lifestyle," she said one night while filing her nails. "Not to become your emotional punching bag. You think I'm your little Amara." The name hit him like a slap. He hadn't heard it aloud in months, and hearing it now, in mockery, stirred something inside him, something he had spent the past year suppressing. Regret was a slow poison, and it had finally reached his bloodstream. His business was also crumbling. Without Amara's careful hands to balance the books or plan his schedules, contracts began slipping through his fingers. Clients complained about late deliveries, careless staff, and the growing rumors of Obinna's domestic chaos. Chisum wasn't interested in helping. She withdrew more and more, draining his bank accounts, maxing out credit cards, and claiming she was trying to find herself. One day, he returned from a failed client meeting to find she had sold his generator without asking. "I needed the cash for something urgent," she said casually. "You can get another one." His blood boiled, but he couldn't raise a hand. He remembered how raising his voice to Amara once felt like power, how discarding her made him feel like a man. But now, with Chisum, even his silence felt powerless. He slept alone most nights. The woman who had once smiled too much no longer even looked at him. Mama Obinna, who had once danced in the courtyard the day Amara left, now sat quietly in her room, watching her son sink. She had lost her influence over Chisum long ago. The younger woman refused to be ordered around or restrained. "I'm not your puppet," Chisum told her once, slamming the door in her face. And it was then that Mama Obinna began to unravel. She grew sick, first with fever, then with arthritis that kept her bedridden for weeks. Obinna, frustrated and broke, began blaming her. "You said I should marry her," he yelled one evening. "You said Amara was my problem. Look around now, Mama. Look." She didn't reply. What could she say? That she had been wrong? That the woman she once called a curse was the only blessing they ever had? Obinna paced that night, unable to sleep. In the silence he began to hear things, Amara's laughter, the clink of her bangles, the softness in her prayers. But those sounds were gone. The house was filled now with nothing but echoes of what used to be. It was a billboard that stopped him. He had been driving through town, heading to a mechanic's shop to fix a sputtering van, when he saw it, a towering banner outside the Civic Center. The backdrop was a glowing sunset, and in the foreground stood a confident woman in a soft yellow gown. Her hair was packed in elegant coils. Her eyes held grace, not pain. Her smile was gentle but bold. And beside her stood two identical twin boys, maybe 3 years old, one holding her hand, the other resting his head against her hip. Beneath the photo were the words, "Guest speaker, Amara Nwokeji, Graced Hands Bakery, Nigeria." Obinna slammed the brakes. Cars behind him honked furiously, but he didn't move. He stared, unblinking, heart racing, his palms damp with sweat. It was her. Amara. His Amara. No longer his. But more shockingly, the boys. He leaned forward, squinting. They looked like him. Exactly like him. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. All the noise around him faded. It was like the world had been holding this revelation hostage, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate him. The twins. She had given birth to twins. His twins. He remembered the night, the one he tried to erase. The night he had broken her, The night she had pleaded and cried while he let his rage and shame swallow him whole. And now she had risen. With their sons. Publicly. Proudly. He pulled his car to the side, got out, and stared at the billboard like it was an altar he had once spat on. People walked past, admiring the banner, nodding in recognition. She's a strong one, that Amara, someone whispered. They say she started with nothing. Obinna stood there, invisible in the crowd, his soul shrinking. He had thought she disappeared into shame. But she had risen into glory. Later that evening, he searched her online. Her name flooded Google. Videos of her speeches. Photos of her in London, Accra, Kigali. Baking tutorials. Interviews. A TEDx talk. He watched them all, trembling. Her voice was calm, poised, without a trace of bitterness. She spoke of faith, of rising from betrayal, of starting over with nothing but flour, tears, and hope. She didn't mention his name once. Not even a hint. And that silence was louder than any accusation. Obinna shut his laptop and sat in the dark. He had left her with nothing. No money. No child. No home. And now she stood before the world as a beacon. Meanwhile, he was trapped in a house with a woman who despised him, a sick mother who no longer spoke, and a bank account that mocked him. That night, he lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling for hours, whispering the question that now haunted every breath. Where is she now? And why does it feel like I'm the one who died? Obinna couldn't stay away. 2 days after seeing the billboard, he walked into the Civic Center disguised in a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, unsure of what he was even searching for. Redemption? Forgiveness? A second chance, none of which he truly deserved. He sat in the last row of the auditorium, heart thumping with every breath. Then she appeared. Not in rags. Not in shame. But in elegance. Amara walked onto the stage wearing a royal blue gown that fluttered as she moved, like she belonged on that platform. The audience stood to applaud. Obinna remained seated, stunned by the way she held the microphone, not with nervous fingers, but with the authority of someone who had earned her voice. She began to speak, and every word sliced him open. She told the story of a woman discarded, broken, buried, but not dead. She spoke of pain without pettiness, of strength that came not from vengeance, but grace. And when she introduced her sons, Chisum and Chikamso, the audience clapped again. But Obinna's tears fell quietly, soaking his lap. After the event, he waited near the exit, unsure of what he'd say. When she emerged, flanked by coordinators and security, she didn't notice him at first. But then their eyes met. Just for a second. Her steps slowed. Her lips parted slightly. Then she turned away. No anger. No smile. Just silence. A silence so deep it echoed louder than any insult. She walked past him, her boys holding each hand, and Obinna stood there like a statue. He wanted to chase after her, to scream her name, to beg for a conversation. But what would he say? That he was sorry? That he missed her? That he wished he could undo the night that broke her? He couldn't even say her name without feeling like a fraud. So he watched her walk away, radiant, whole, untouchable. The same woman he once called Barren was now the mother of kings. That night, he drove back home and entered the compound like a ghost. Chisum was gone, left a note saying she needed space. His mother lay in bed, coughing quietly, too weak to curse or scold. Obinna sat in his old room, the one he used to share with Amara, and stared at the empty side of the bed. He whispered her name, Amara, just once, as if saying it more than that would break him entirely. He reached for his phone and scrolled through the photos of her online again. Then he opened the video of her latest speech and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, calm, healing, whole. It was then that he realized he hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a destiny. And worse still, he had thrown it away with his own hands. The days that followed Amara's silent dismissal haunted Obinna more than any punishment ever could. Her silence wasn't cruel, it was complete. It offered no opportunity for argument, no crack through which he could beg or justify himself. And that silence wrapped around him like a noose of consequence. He tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. His food turned tasteless. Even his clothes felt heavier on his body. He could no longer recognize the man staring back at him in the mirror. The proud, confident husband who once barked orders now looked like a shell of regret. He began to obsess over everything he had overlooked. The meals she cooked with love, the sacrifices she made, the dreams she deferred to build his. Each memory was now a dagger, and each one drew blood. He began calling people, old friends, church members, neighbors, asking if they knew where Amara lived. But no one responded. It was as if the universe had agreed to hide her from him, the same way he once tried to hide her shame. In desperation, he visited Mama Ifioma, dressed in a faded shirt and dust-covered shoes. She looked at him for a long moment before opening the gate. He stood there, unable to speak. She led him into her sitting room, offered him water, and waited. Finally he spoke, his voice cracked, full of salt. "I saw her," he said. "At the summit. I saw the boys." Mama Ifioma simply nodded. "She told me she saw you," she replied. "She also told me she felt nothing." Those words hit him like a train. "Nothing," he echoed. "Not even anger?" The woman looked at him with tired wisdom. "You killed the part of her that used to need your approval. What remains now is peace. And you don't disturb peace once it has settled." Obinna lowered his head, shoulders trembling. He wept, not just for her, but for himself. For the years he wasted. The family he broke. The future he threw away before it ever began. Chisum never returned. She had left the house the same way she entered it, unapologetically. She emptied the joint account, sold Obinna's backup delivery van, and took what jewelry she could. She left behind no note this time. Mama Obinna remained bedridden, frail and quiet, no longer the iron-voiced woman who once ruled the household with disdain. And Obinna? He wandered through each day in a daze. The house felt like a museum of his mistakes, Amara's framed photo still on a shelf, her old Bible still in the drawer. He couldn't bring himself to throw them away. He thought of reaching out again, writing a letter, or visiting her foundation's office. But each time he imagined looking into her eyes again, shame held him back. Not because he feared her rejection, but because he knew he deserved it. Regret had become his shadow, his companion, his daily reflection. And it would walk with him for the rest of his life. Amara stood on the balcony of her modest new duplex, overlooking a small garden where her sons played beneath a mango tree. The air smelled of rain and baked goods. Her bakery was doing well, her staff were loyal, and her calendar was full. Yet, none of those things defined her success. What did was the peace she carried inside her chest. It wasn't loud or boastful. It didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. She had once begged for a child, for a home, for a husband who saw her. But now, she realized she had everything she needed, and more. Her twins were growing fast, asking questions about their father. "Shenivalit. He is alive," she told them, "but we live in peace without him." They nodded, innocent and trusting, unaware of the pain their lives had once come from. And in that truth, Amara found no bitterness, only clarity. She had survived the storm. Now, she was her own shelter. When Obinna finally wrote to her through the office of her NGO, Amara read the letter in her study. His words were soaked in remorse, confession, and longing for just one moment to explain. He didn't ask for a second chance. He simply begged for a conversation, even if only to say thank you or goodbye. She closed the letter gently and sat in silence for a long while. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She prayed. Not for him, but for herself. To remain free from the weight of his guilt. To keep walking forward without looking back too long. Days later, she replied, not with a letter, but through a phone call. Her voice was soft but firm. "Obinna," she said, "I forgive you. But I will never return to you." There was a pause. Then she added, "What we had was a chapter. What I have now is a new book. I hope you find healing, but I've already found mine." As she ended the call, Amara looked out the window again, just as her sons turned and waved. "Mummy," they shouted joyfully. She waved back, her smile radiant. It wasn't the smile of a woman who had won a battle. It was the smile of a woman who no longer needed to fight. She had been bruised, but she wasn't broken. She had been betrayed, But she was never buried. Her strength had bloomed in the silence. Her joy had been born through pain. And now her life was a testimony, not just a survival, but a victory with grace. She picked up her pen, wrote the final sentence in her journal, and closed it gently. On the cover, she had written one word: peace. Not as a destination, but as a name for everything she had become. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.